The wind on Gornik 7 was always restless. It carried fine red dust that coated everything, the walls, the windows, and even the people. The small outpost of Ferric stood like a stubborn scar on the endless plains, surrounded by nothing but dry rock and thin air. The settlers who lived there had grown used to the harsh life. They knew every sound of the place. The creak of metal shutters in the wind, the hum of the water recycler, and the groan of the old generator. So when a different sound came that morning, the deep rumble of an incoming shuttle, people stopped what they were doing. Heads turned toward the horizon. A dark shape broke through the pale sky, coming in low. The ship was small, not much bigger than a cargo hauler. It descended slowly, engines throwing up a storm of dust that swirled in the air. People shaded their eyes and squinted to get a better look. Visitors were rare here. Traders sometimes passed through, but most avoided Gornik 7 unless they had no choice. The shuttle landed just beyond the outpost's main square. The engines hissed, then went quiet. A few settlers stepped forward, cautious but curious. The outpost doors slid open, and more people came to see. From the ramp, a figure appeared, tall, steady, dressed in simple travel gear. He wore no armor, carried no heavy pack. The only thing on his hip was a thin, polished metal rod in a short sheath. It was no longer than his forearm. Too small to be a rifle, and too slim to be a club. It looked almost like something from a kitchen drawer rather than a battlefield. Some of the settlers exchanged glances. They had seen miners with bigger tools. Among the onlookers was Mira, a woman in her early 30s. Known for trading goods and never holding back her words, she had a sharp, watchful look in her eyes and a habit of smiling when she found something amusing. She leaned against the wall of the trading hall, arms crossed, as she studied the stranger. The man stepped onto the dusty ground, scanning the outpost with calm eyes. He didn't seem tense or worried. He just walked forward, his boots leaving neat prints in the dust. By the time he reached the trading hall, a small crowd had formed. People wanted to know who he was, why he was here, and why on all the moons of Gornik he thought that tiny rod on his hip could protect him. Inside the hall, the air was cooler but still smelled faintly of metal and dust. The stranger stepped up to the counter, nodding politely to the man behind it. "I need rations," he said in a steady voice. "Enough for 2 weeks, and water tablets, if you have them." The trader behind the counter nodded but kept looking at the rod on his hip. He hesitated before turning to fetch the supplies. From across the room, Mira's voice broke the quiet. "Is that a toothpick?" Her tone wasn't harsh, more curious, with a hint of humor. A few people chuckled. One man muttered, "Maybe he's planning to fight off trouble with a dinner set." The stranger glanced at her. His eyes were clear, calm, and unreadable. He didn't seem offended. Instead, he gave a small smile, like he had heard the joke before. "It's enough," he said simply. Mira tilted her head, studying him. "Enough for what?" Stirring soup. More laughter rolled through the hall. Even the trader behind the counter grinned while stacking the supplies. But the man didn't rise to the teasing. He just stood there, hands resting loosely at his sides, as if the conversation didn't matter much. Outside, the wind pushed against the hall's thin walls. The dust rattled against the windows. Somewhere far off, the deep, faint thump of machinery echoed across the plains, the sound of mining rigs working in the distance. Mira kept her eyes on him, curious despite herself. Most travelers who came through Ferric either carried big, obvious weapons or moved in groups. This man was alone, and his gear was so light it almost looked careless. But his posture wasn't careless at all. He stood like someone who knew exactly where his weight was, someone who could move in a moment without losing balance. The trader finished packing the supplies and set them on the counter. The man paid with a handful of clean, pressed credit. Chits rare on Gornik, where most trade was done in goods. That made a few people in the hall raise their eyebrows. As he turned to leave, Mira spoke again. "You travel far with nothing but that stick." He stopped, looked at her for a moment, and said, "Far enough." Then he walked toward the door. The hall fell quiet for a few seconds after he left. People looked at one another, sharing silent thoughts. They didn't know his name, his purpose, or where he had come from. All they knew was that a stranger had arrived in Ferric with the most ridiculous-looking weapon they had ever seen, and yet he didn't seem the least bit worried about it outside. The dust swirled around his boots as he crossed the square. The shuttle behind him stood still, its engines cooling in the wind, somewhere in the distance. The low sky rumbled, not with thunder, but with something heavier, like the approach of trouble. Mira watched him from the doorway. She didn't know why, but something about the way he moved made her uneasy. She had laughed at his toothpick, but a part of her wondered if she had just made a mistake. The stranger didn't look back. He kept walking until the wind swallowed him, leaving only the faint prints of his boots on the red dust of Gornik 7. The day passed slowly in Ferric. The wind never stopped, carrying the same red dust that settled on every surface. In the trading hall, the crowd had thinned, leaving only a few locals sitting around small tables. Most were talking about the stranger who had landed that morning. Mira was still there, leaning in her usual spot near the corner table. She had a habit of staying in the hall until the evening, listening to stories and keeping her ears open for any trade opportunities. She told herself she wasn't curious about the stranger, but her eyes often wandered to the door, expecting him to return. In return he did. The door slid open with a faint hiss, letting in a gust of dry wind. The tall man stepped inside again, carrying a small bag of rations. His thin metal rod was still at his side. He walked straight to the counter, his boots quiet against the floor. The hall's regulars looked up. One man muttered under his breath, "Back for more soup sticks." Mira smirked. She couldn't help herself. "There it is again," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "The legendary toothpick of Ferric. Tell me, stranger, does it at least have a sharp end?" A few laughs rolled through the hall. The stranger paused at the counter, looking down at the goods before answering. His voice was steady, almost casual. "Sharp enough." Mira leaned forward. "Sharp enough for what? Cutting fruit? Scratching your name into stone?" The stranger didn't seem irritated, but there was something in his eyes, not anger, not pride, but a kind of patience that made her pause. He turned slightly, meeting her gaze without blinking. "For whatever comes," he said simply. The laughter in the hall faded. His words weren't loud, but there was a weight to them. The trader behind the counter cleared his throat. "You staying long, traveler?" The man shook his head. "Only until my ship is ready. Fuel cells need cooling before I move on." Mira crossed her arms. "So you're just passing through. Makes sense. Not much here for someone who carries only a toothpick." She smiled again, though less sharply this time. She was testing him, trying to understand if he would break or reveal something. The stranger just picked up his bag, placed a few more chits on the counter, and said, "Some things aren't meant to be explained." That answer sat in Mira's mind longer than she expected. She watched him walk to a table near the wall and sit down. He unpacked a ration pack, quietly eating while his eyes followed no particular movement. He seemed more interested in listening than speaking. Outside, the air was changing. A low vibration began to hum through the floor. The locals noticed it first, miners and traders who knew the difference between a storm and something mechanical. One man by the window frowned. "Hear that? That's not wind." Another stood and walked to the doorway, squinting at the horizon. His voice tightened. "Engines, more than one." The hall grew still. Out here, multiple engines meant only a few things, and most of them were bad. Mira stepped to the doorway beside the man. The horizon was blurry with dust, but through it she could see dark shapes moving fast, leaving trails in the air. Her stomach sank. She had seen this before. Raiders. The Rax Syndicate had been hitting outposts for months, taking supplies, fuel, and sometimes people. Ferric was far from the main routes, but that didn't mean it was safe. The warning sirens began to wail. People in the hall scrambled for their weapons, bulky rifles, scrap-made pistols, and whatever else they could grab. Someone ran toward the generator to activate the outer gate defenses. Mira looked over her shoulder. The stranger was still sitting at his table, calmly packing away his half-eaten ration. He didn't rush, didn't look panicked. "You might want to hide that toothpick now," She called to him, half in jest, half in warning. He stood, adjusted the thin rod on his hip, and stepped toward the door. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were focused now, scanning the open space beyond the outpost walls. "You're not from here," Mira said as he passed her. "If you want to survive, stay inside. Let the rest of us deal with this." He didn't stop walking. "I've dealt with this before." Mira frowned, caught off guard by the calm certainty in his voice. She wasn't sure if he was brave, foolish, or both. Outside, the dust was thicker now, whipped up by the approaching craft. The engines were louder, the shapes clearer, small attack skiffs painted in the Syndicate's black and red colors. The settlers were forming a line, weapons raised, nerves tight. The stranger walked past them, toward the center of the square. People stared at him as if he had lost his senses. Mira gritted her teeth and grabbed her rifle. She didn't have time to argue with him. The skiffs were almost at the gates, their mounted guns already swiveling toward the outpost. Somewhere inside her, though, a small thought kept echoing, the same thought that had flickered in her mind that morning when she first saw him. Maybe, just maybe, that toothpick wasn't a joke after all. The alarm sirens echoed across the dusty square of Ferric. They were not loud enough to drown out the steady thrum of the raider skiffs as they closed in, engines slicing through the dry air. The sky near the horizon blurred with motion, black and red hulls darting low, their shadows skipping over the plains. The settlers moved quickly. Gates creaked as they slid shut. Rusted barricades were dragged into position. People shouted orders, their voices sharp with tension. Most here were miners, traders, or mechanics, but they knew how to fight when they had to. Life on Gornik 7 demanded that kind of readiness. Mira ran to the side wall of the square, slinging her rifle over her shoulder. She crouched behind a half-height barrier of metal scraps welded together. Her fingers checked the rifle's power cell out of habit. The weapon was old but reliable. Her eyes kept drifting toward the center of the square, toward the stranger. He was still moving forward, calm, as if there wasn't a group of Syndicate raiders about to tear through the settlement. The thin metal rod at his side swung lightly with each step. His boots left clear marks in the red dust, steady and even. One of the locals hissed from behind cover, "Hey, get down, you're in the open." The stranger didn't answer. He stopped in the center, standing with his hands loose at his sides. Eyes fixed on the approaching skiffs. From her position, Mira could see his face more clearly now. His expression wasn't grim or tense. It was simply focused. He looked like someone who had been in this kind of moment many times before. The first of the raider skiffs roared into range, kicking up swirls of dust. It slowed just enough for the gunners to aim. Twin barrels rotated toward the outpost, the Syndicate's jagged insignia glaring red under the pale sky. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker from the lead skiff. "Ferric outpost, drop your weapons. Open your gates, and no one gets hurt." Mira muttered under her breath. She had heard that lie before. Raiders never kept their promises. The stranger took a step forward. Mira couldn't believe it. "What are you doing?" she hissed, though she knew he wouldn't hear her over the engines and sirens. The lead gunner shouted something to his crew, and the barrels began to glow faintly, a sure sign of charging fire. The settlers tensed, ready to shoot first if they had to. The stranger reached for the rod at his side. It came free from its sheath with a smooth motion, catching the light. Up close, Mira could see faint markings etched into its surface, patterns that seemed too precise to be decoration. He held it low, in one hand, like it was nothing more than a walking stick. A hum filled the air. It wasn't loud, but it was deep, like the sound of distant machinery. The rod shifted, sliding, folding, extending in quick, fluid movements until it was no longer a short piece of metal, but a long, gleaming blade. Its edge caught the sunlight in a way Mira had never seen before, a sharp line that seemed almost too perfect to be real. The hum grew sharper, more focused. The lead skiff's gunner hesitated. This was not what he expected to see in the open square. The stranger planted his feet. His posture shifted, not aggressive, but balanced, ready. The gunner barked an order, and the first shot came. A bright pulse of energy shot across the open space. Mira braced for the impact. But instead of exploding against the ground, the pulse struck the blade. There was a sound like glass breaking, and the energy scattered into harmless sparks. Mira's mouth went dry. The stranger didn't flinch. He moved, not with speed born of panic, but with purpose, stepping forward, blade angled just so. The next shot came, and again the blade turned it aside, sparks falling like rain. The settlers were staring now. The idea of anyone standing alone in the open against raider fire was madness. Yet here was this man, blocking each shot as though it were nothing more than dust in the wind. The second skiff broke formation, swinging wide to flank. The stranger turned his head slightly, gauging the movement. Then, without warning, he broke into a run. It wasn't the heavy, desperate run of a man charging in fear. It was fast, smooth, efficient. He closed the distance in seconds, blade low, stepped silent despite the speed. Mira barely had time to process what she was seeing before the stranger was at the edge of the skiff. With a single upward slash, the blade carved through the skiff's hull. The metal split cleanly, a glowing line marking the cut. The engine sputtered, coughed, then died. The craft listed sideways, slamming into the dirt. Its crew scrambled out, some falling as the skiff skidded to a stop. None dared move toward the man with the blade. The other raiders hesitated now. Their engines still roared, but the easy confidence of their approach was gone. The stranger turned to face them, blade held steady at his side, the hum still whispering in the air. Mira realized she had been holding her breath. The settlers, seeing the change in the raiders, began to rally. Someone shouted, "Open fire!" and the air filled with the crack of rifles and the hiss of energy bolts. The raiders returned fire, but now their aim was split between the defenders behind the barricades and the lone figure in the square. The stranger moved through it all, every strike with his blade measured, precise, and unstoppable. Mira felt a strange mix of fear and awe. She had mocked him earlier, called his weapon a toothpick. Now she couldn't take her eyes off it. The way it cut through metal, the way it seemed to turn enemy fire aside. It wasn't a weapon she recognized from any world she had visited, and it was very clear now. He knew exactly how to use it. The square was filled with the sound of battle. Raiders shouted orders from their skiffs while the settlers fired from behind rusted barricades. Dust hung in the air like a thin fog, making shapes blur together, but one figure stood out clearly. The stranger moved through the chaos with a calm precision that didn't belong in such a fight. His blade hummed as it caught the sunlight, its edges shining in a clean, steady line. Each time an energy bolt came near, the blade angled slightly, scattering the shot into harmless sparks. Mira fired her rifle from behind cover, trying to keep the raiders' attention split. But even as she aimed, her eyes kept returning to the man in the square. He didn't run wildly or waste movements. Every step he took had purpose. Every swing of the blade was controlled. One raider jumped from a skiff, landing hard and charging toward the stranger with a heavy steel axe. His boots kicked up red dust as he roared. Swinging the weapon high, the stranger didn't back away. He simply stepped to the side, and the axe came down where he had been standing a moment before. Before the raider could recover, the blade moved in a short, clean arc. The axe split in two, its pieces falling into the dust. The raider froze, staring at the weapon in his hands, now useless. Then he stumbled back, choosing to retreat rather than press the attack. Another skiff swung around, trying to catch the stranger from behind. Its gunner opened fire in short bursts. The stranger twisted, his blade catching the first shot, then the next, each one deflected away. Then he moved, fast. With 3 long strides he reached the skiff's side, leapt, and landed on the hull. From the ground, Mira could only see flashes of movement, the stranger bending low, the blade slicing through something near the engine, the crew scrambling to abandon ship. In seconds, the skiff was drifting, its power gone. It slid across the dirt until it tipped and came to rest on its side. The settlers saw their chance. Shouts rang out as they pushed forward from their barricades, driving the raiders back with a sudden wave of fire. The stranger stepped away from the fallen skiff, dust swirling around his boots, and turned to face the next wave of attackers. Mira moved along the barricade to get closer. From this new angle, she could see the strange markings along the length of the blade more clearly. They glowed faintly, almost as if they were alive, reacting to the movement of the weapon. It was unlike anything she had seen in all her trading runs. Two more raiders rushed him together, one with a spear and the other with a short blaster. The spear came first. Thrusting toward his chest, the stranger turned his body just enough that the spear slid past, then angled his blade upward. The spear's shaft split in half as easily as dry wood. The second raider fired point blank, but the stranger stepped in close, the blade lifting in a smooth arc to catch the shot and redirect it harmlessly into the ground in one fluid motion. He tapped the flat of his blade against the raider's blaster. The weapon sparked, then went dead, its circuits fried. Mira couldn't hear his voice over the noise, but she noticed that he never shouted, never roared like the raiders did. He fought in silence, letting his actions speak. The lead raider skiff, the largest of the group, circled around to face him. Its pilot throttled the engines, and the gunner prepared the heavy cannon mounted on its deck. This was no short-burst weapon. If it fired, it could tear through the center of the outpost in seconds. The stranger stood his ground. The cannon's barrel glowed bright as it charged. The air vibrated with the buildup of power. Settlers shouted warnings, some diving for cover, others still firing to try to distract the crew. The stranger moved at the very last moment. His body blurred with speed as he crossed the space between himself and the skiff. The cannon fired, but the blade met the blast head-on. For an instant, there was only light, blinding and sharp. Then the blast shattered into streaks of harmless energy that burned themselves out in the dust in that same instant. The stranger was on the deck of the skiff. The crew tried to react, but his blade swept once, twice, cutting through control levers and power lines with surgical precision. The engine sputtered, then shut down completely. The skiff dropped hard to the ground, its crew scrambling away. A sudden stillness fell across the square. The remaining raiders looked around, realizing that half their force was already disabled, and the rest were pinned by settlers who now had the upper hand. The stranger lowered his blade, the hum fading slightly but not disappearing. His stance was still ready, as if expecting another attack. But the raiders were losing their will to fight, one by one. They backed toward their remaining skiffs. Orders were shouted, and the surviving craft lifted into the air, retreating over the plains until they were nothing but dark specks against the pale sky. The sirens wound down. The only sound was the wind moving through the square, carrying with it the scent of scorched metal. Settlers slowly stepped out from behind cover, their eyes turning toward the man in the center. Mira walked forward, her rifle lowered but still in hand. She stopped a few paces away from him. The blade in his hand still shimmered faintly, its surface as clean as if it had never touched the chaos of battle. She met his eyes. "I guess it's not a toothpick after all." He gave the smallest of smiles, then pressed something on the hilt. The blade folded in on itself with smooth, precise movements until it was once again the short, harmless-looking rod she had mocked. He clipped it to his side and looked past her, scanning the outpost. The settlers began to murmur, their voices filled with questions. Some wanted to know where he had come from. Others wanted to know what that blade was. But he didn't answer anyone. He simply nodded once, as if acknowledging the fight was done, and began to walk toward the edge of the square. Mira watched him go, the dust swirling in his wake. She knew the raiders would talk about this day, and so would the settlers. No one would forget the stranger who stood in the open and turned syndicate fire into sparks, and she, more than anyone, wanted to know the truth about that blade. The battle in Ferric was over, but the air still felt heavy. The dust from the raiders' retreat hung low over the square, glowing faintly in the afternoon light. Bits of twisted metal lay scattered where skiffs had fallen silent, their engines dead. The settlers moved among the wreckage, checking for wounded and gathering anything useful. A few of them spoke in low voices about the stranger, their eyes drifting toward him as if they still weren't sure what they had just seen. Mira stood with her rifle slung over her shoulder, watching him from across the square. He had not joined the others in searching the wrecks. Instead, he was cleaning the blade, if cleaning was the right word for a weapon. That didn't seem to hold dirt or scorch marks at all. The metal gleamed as though it had never been touched by battle. She walked toward him slowly. He noticed her approach but didn't speak. "You fight like you've done this before," she said. "I have," he replied, his voice calm, eyes still on the blade. "Against raiders?" she asked. "Against worse." That answer made her pause. She wanted to ask what he meant, but his tone told her he wasn't ready to explain. Instead, she tried another question. "That weapon, I've traded all over, and I've never seen anything like it." "It's not for trade," he said simply, folding the blade back into the small rod and clipping it to his side. She let out a small breath. Half a laugh. "I figured that much." Before she could say more, one of the settlers hurried over. "Mira, we need you at the gate. One of the skiffs left behind has fuel cells we can salvage." She gave the stranger one last glance before heading toward the gate. He didn't follow. By evening, the outpost had settled into a cautious calm. The wrecks were stripped of anything useful, and the rest was hauled outside the walls to keep the square clear. The generator hummed steadily, and the sirens were silent again. But everyone knew the Rax Syndicate rarely gave up after one failed raid. Inside the trading hall, people gathered at long tables for the evening meal. The stranger sat alone at a small table near the wall. Mira noticed that no one sat too close to him, not because they disliked him, but because they didn't quite understand him yet. From her seat, she watched him eat with quiet efficiency, his eyes scanning the room now and then. He didn't seem tense, just aware. One of the miners leaned toward her. "You think he'll stay? Might be good to have someone like that around when the syndicate comes back." Mira shook her head slightly. "I don't think he's the staying type." "Then where's he going?" the miner asked. She didn't answer. Truth was, she didn't know, and she wasn't sure she wanted him to leave before she learned more about that. Blade. Later that night, the wind outside rose again, rattling the shutters. Most of the settlers were sleeping, but Mira was still awake, sitting in the quiet hall with a mug of warm tea. She wasn't alone. The stranger entered quietly, carrying a small pack. He set it on a table, then began adjusting the straps as if preparing to leave. "You're going now?" she asked. "Before dawn," he said. She frowned. "The raiders could come back tomorrow." "You saw how close they got." "I did. And you're just walking away." He paused, then looked at her. "They weren't here for the outpost." That caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "They were here for me," he said. His tone was flat, not boastful, but the words made her sit up straighter. "Why?" she asked. "Because of what I carry." His hand rested lightly on the rod at his side. "And because they're not the only ones looking for it." The weight of his words hung in the air. Before she could press for details, a sharp knock came. At the hall door, a breathless guard stepped inside. "Mira, you better come to the wall. Now." They followed the guard quickly. At the top of the wall, the cold wind hit their faces. Out on the plain, faint lights moved in the dark. Too many to be a small scouting party. Mira felt her stomach tighten. Already, the stranger stood beside her, eyes locked on the distant glow. "No," he said. "Not the same group." "Then who?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter. "The ones who built this." He touched the hilt of the folded blade. Mira stared at him. "You mean?" The lights shifted, spreading wider, moving with precision. "Whoever they were organized. They won't talk," the stranger said. "They'll take what they came for and leave nothing standing." Mira turned to him. "And what exactly did you bring to my outpost?" His gaze stayed on the approaching lights. "A fight you were never meant to see. The first raid had been sudden, brutal, and short, but this felt different. The movements in the dark were patient, controlled. These weren't reckless raiders. They were something else entirely." The stranger adjusted his pack and stepped away from the wall. "Get your people ready," he told Mira. "This time, stay behind the barricades. No matter what happens." She followed him down from the wall. "You think I'm going to hide while you go out there alone?" He glanced at her. the faintest hint of a smile at the edge of his mouth. It worked the first time. She didn't smile back. The first time, you didn't have me watching your back. He didn't argue. But he didn't agree either. His attention had already shifted, mind clearly working through what was about to come. By the time they reached the square, the settlers were gathering weapons again. The sound of the approaching engines was still far off, but growing. The stranger stopped in the center of the square, exactly where he had stood during the first fight. Mira took her place a few steps behind him, rifle ready. She still didn't know what was coming, but she knew one thing. If it involved that blade, she wanted to see it. The battle was raging across the dusty streets of the outpost. Smoke drifted from broken buildings, and the smell of burned metal filled the air. The Rax raiders were fierce, but the settlers, now inspired by Rion's skill, began to fight with new courage. It was as if his presence had changed something in them. Rion moved through the fight like a steady wind. His blade cut clean arcs in the air, each swing precise and controlled. He wasted no movement, never stepping more than needed. The settlers around him started to notice this. They saw how he was not just strong, but careful. Every time a raider got close to one of them, Rion's blade or his swift movement was there to block the attack. Mira, who had once laughed at him, was now at his side. She fired her rifle at enemies that tried to surround him. Her hands were steady, her eyes sharp. She was not a trained soldier, but something about working alongside Rion made her feel braver. She called out warnings, told the settlers where to move, and kept an eye on his flank. The raiders were beginning to hesitate. They had expected an easy fight, but instead they faced a defense that was growing stronger by the minute. The settlers moved with more unity, shouting to each other, covering each other's backs. The sound of footsteps and battle cries mixed with the hum of Rion's strange blade. One large raider charged toward a group of settlers who were reloading their weapons. Rion saw him and moved fast. His blade cut through the raider's heavy armor as if it were cloth. The raider fell, and the settlers quickly finished reloading. "Push forward," Mira shouted. Her voice was clear and confident now. The settlers followed her call, advancing toward the edge of the street. Each step forward was hard, but they were no longer just defending. They were taking ground back. Rion did not speak much, but his actions spoke for him. He fought in a way that told the settlers they could win. He faced danger without fear, and that feeling spread to everyone around him. When a raider tried to rush through the center of their line, Rion stepped in, his blade flashing. The attacker went down instantly, and the settlers cheered. The battle stretched into the side alleys and small yards between the buildings. The settlers knew these paths better than the raiders, and they began to use that to their advantage. They took higher ground, set traps, and cut off escape routes. Mira stayed near Rion, her rifle hot from constant fire. She glanced at his weapon whenever there was a moment to breathe. She had never seen anything like it. It was not just sharp, it had a strange shimmer along the edge, as if the air itself bent around it. Whatever it was not something the settlers or the Rax could build. As they pushed forward, the noise of the battle began to change. The shouting of the raiders was no longer full of confidence. It was mixed with fear and confusion. Some of them began to pull back, realizing that this fight was slipping out of their control. The settlers pressed harder. Every time a raider turned to run, another settler was ready to cut them off. The ground was scattered with broken weapons and dropped supplies. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to see far, but Rion seemed to move without needing to. His steps were sure, and his strikes always found their target. A moment came when the last group of raiders tried to regroup near the edge of the settlement. Rion saw them and signaled with a short wave of his hand. Mira understood. Together, they led a final push. The settlers followed, their voices rising in a single shout. The clash was quick and fierce. The raiders fought desperately, but they were tired, and the settlers were fueled by the hope of victory. Rion's blade cut through the last line, and the settlers forced the raiders to scatter into the wasteland. The moment the last of them ran, the settlement went quiet except for the crackling of fires and the distant sound of retreating engines. The settlers stood still for a moment, breathing heavily. Looking round as if to make sure it was truly over, Mira lowered her rifle and looked at Rian. His blade was still in its extended form, glowing faintly in the dusty light. She watched as he pressed a hidden point on the handle, and the weapon folded back into its small, simple shape. It looked harmless again, almost like it could fit in a pocket. The settlers began to cheer, voices rising one after another until the sound filled the air. Some clapped Rian on the shoulder as they passed, others simply nodded in deep respect. No one made jokes about his weapon now. Rian did not smile or raise his hands in victory. He simply looked around, making sure the settlement was safe. Mira stepped closer to him. She wanted to ask about the blade, where it came from, and how he learned to use it. But something in his calm expression told her that now was not the time. Instead, she said, "You turned the fight. Without you, we might not be here right now." Rian met her eyes for a moment, then looked away toward the horizon where the raiders had fled. "The fight was yours," he said quietly. "I only reminded you what you could do." His words stayed with Mira as the settlers began repairing the damaged buildings and helping the wounded. The battle had been won, but she knew this was not the last time trouble would come to Gornik 7. Still, she also knew one more thing. If Rian was around, no one would underestimate a human with a toothpick again. The night after the battle was quiet to quiet. The settlement of Gornik 7 had always been a place where the wind carried the sound of machinery, the chatter of workers, and the hum of life. But now it was filled with the echo of hammers and the murmur of tired voices. As repairs began, Rian stood apart from the main group, watching the settlers work. He leaned against a broken wall, his eyes scanning the streets as if expecting another attack. The fires from the day's fight had burned out, leaving only the faint smell of smoke in the cool night air. Mira approached, her boots crunching softly on the dirt. She carried some metal mugs, steam rising from them. Without a word, she handed one to Rian. "It's not much," she said, "just hot leaf water. The good stuff ran out last month." Rian took the mug and nodded. "It's warm. That's enough." They stood in silence for a while, watching a group of settlers lift a damaged wall back into place. Children peeked from behind crates, their eyes wide as they stared at the man with the strange blade. To them, he was more than just a fighter. He was a story they would tell for years. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Mira asked finally. Rian took a slow sip before answering. "Yes, this fight is over. My path goes elsewhere." Mira set her mug down and crossed her arms. "You could stay. We could use someone like you. The racks will come back, or someone worse will." He looked at her, his expression calm but unreadable. "You don't need me today. You saw what you can do when you stand together. That will matter more than one blade." She wanted to argue, but deep down, she knew he was right. Still, the thought of him walking away felt wrong. As if sensing her thoughts, Rian straightened and glanced toward the horizon. "I came here because I heard trouble was growing. Now it's gone. But there are other places, other fights, and people who need help." Mira sighed, looking down at the dusty ground. "Then at least let me thank you properly." "You already have," Rian said. By morning, the settlement was buzzing with energy again. Word of their victory had spread to nearby outposts, and traders arrived early, curious about the story of the human with the folding blade. The settlers told the tale again and again, each version making Rian sound larger than life. Rian himself said little. He helped lift supplies, fixed a damaged water pipe, and carried heavy panels for the builders. It was strange to Mira how someone so skilled in battle could work so quietly and humbly. Afterward, when midday came, Rian prepared to leave. His bag was light, his steps steady. Mira and a small group followed him to the edge of the settlement. The children waved from rooftops and doorways, calling out their goodbyes. "You sure you won't stay at least a few more days?" Mira asked. Rian shook his head. "If I stay too long, I'll start to belong. That's not my way." She studied him for a moment, wondering if there was more to that answer. But before she could speak, one of the younger settlers ran up, holding something wrapped in cloth. "This is for you," the boy said shyly. Rian knelt, taking the bundle and unwrapping it. Inside was a simple leather strap, carefully stitched. "What is it?" he asked. "A wrist guard." The boy said, "We made it from the hide of one of the Rax beasts. So when you fight somewhere else, you'll remember us." Rian looked at it for a long moment before fastening it around his wrist. "I will remember," he said. Mara stepped closer. "And we'll remember you, not just for the fight, but for showing us we could win." He gave a small nod, then turned to walk toward the open land beyond the settlement. The horizon shimmered with heat, and the wind carried the dry scent of dust. Mira watched until he became a small figure in the distance. She had the strange feeling that their paths would cross again someday. Far away from the settlement, Rian stopped on a ridge and looked back. The buildings of Gornik 7 stood proud against the barren land, stronger than before. He turned away, his thoughts already on the next place that might need his help. The folding blade rested at his side, its harmless form belying the power it held. Rian's path was uncertain, but his purpose was clear: to go where others could, not to stand when others fell, and to remind people that even in the darkest times, hope could be forged like steel. The sun dipped lower in the sky as he walked on, his shadow stretching far behind him, and somewhere in the distance, the wind whispered the beginning of another story.